The SEC spring meetings concluded last week with a lot of squabbling and not much consequential decision making. And if that sounds like a surprise, well, you don't know the SEC spring meetings. That's what usually happens every year in Destin, Florida, is much discussion, very little action. The SEC kicked the can down the road on whether to go from 8 to 9 conference games in 2026. They tabled that conversation without coming to a decision. Also, the subject of much heated debate at the spring meetings was the future college football playoff format for 2026 and beyond. No decisions on that front, much conversation. Welcome into SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. Today on the pod, we're going to break down the conversation as it surrounded these potential playoff formats for 2026 and beyond. To review, we know what the playoff format looks like for this season. It's going to be 12-team playoff, much like the playoff last year. 5 conference champions are guaranteed auto bids with 7 at-large bids. The only difference is no more guaranteed buys anymore for conference champions. It's just the top 4 teams in the rankings will get the buys this year. 2026 and beyond, no format is approved. Much of the conversation focuses on 16-team models, but a couple of models are being heavily debated among the conferences, and even within the SEC, there is not consensus on which 16-team model they prefer. So, John, we'll get into the specifics of it in a moment, but at first I want your thoughts on the conference schedule debate before we get into the playoff format debate. It seems like every year I cover the SEC spring meetings, the stakeholders come up with new excuses not to approve a 9-game schedule. It's always something different. This year it was, well, we don't know what the playoff format's going to be yet for 2026, so how could we possibly decide whether to add a 9th conference game? I mean, it's really been any reason and every reason under the sun. One year I'm expecting to go to the spring meetings and say, like, until we get peace in the Middle East, we can't possibly go to a 9th conference game. What's your views on this? The SEC kicking the can on the road and down the road and delaying the decision on what to do with the conference schedule?
Well, with all their kicking of cans, the can is barely recognizable now. It can barely form a can. So, yeah, they've really overthought this. It's it's a I thought this would have been done I thought they would have done it once they went to a 16-team league. Okay, now we're going to have our scheduling format. Obviously, they didn't do this in the dark of night on a spur of the moment. There was some thought put into it, bringing in Texas and Oklahoma. You do away with the divisions. You have one big 16-team conference. So go ahead, do a format, do a permanent. But instead, we're on year 2 of an interim schedule. At some point, does an interim schedule, like if it's interim long enough, it's like somebody taking over an abandoned house. If they stay there long enough, it becomes theirs, squatters' rights, so to speak. Yeah, I'm just kind of tired of it by now.
Yeah, and 2 years ago, that's the last time this debate came into focus when they ultimately stayed at 8 and approved this, call it an interim 2-year, 8-game schedule. At that time, sort of the excuse that was offered that you would hear, at least kind of whispered about in the hallways. Not as many people said it, publicly. And pronounced in a pronounced way, but basically the idea was that ESPN was not putting forward any extra money at that point to add a 9th conference game, and so there were some who I think fairly believed inside the SEC, why give it away for free? Why add that 9th conference game until ESPN's ready to put more compensation on the table? Well, now 2 years later, according to multiple reports, ESPN is open to sweetening the media rights deal pretty substantially for the SEC if they were to add a 9th conference game. So that excuse is kind of off the table. And now it's like the excuse you hear most is, well, can't add a 9th conference game until we know what the playoff format's going to be. The irony of all that is, John, as we know, the SEC and the Big Ten are the ones that wield the most clout in determining what the playoff format's going to be. And so as much as the SEC brass kind of squabble about, can't do this until we know the playoff. It's like, well, then you guys need to figure out what you want to do at the playoff, and stop delaying this. It's like they think there's some sort of outside force slowing them down. It's like, well, you are the force most indecisive on the playoff format that you want, and so you're the one slowing down your decision on what to do with the conference schedule. But anything, I guess, for an excuse to stay at 8 conference games. And I know you and I have talked about this. We talked about it on the last edition of the podcast, John. We used to be staunch proponents of adding a 9th conference game. I know at one time you thought they should play 10 conference games. Now, I know I'm kind of in the camp, and I feel like maybe you are a little bit more of, if you want to stay at 8 conference games, I don't love it, but so be it. But just strengthen your non-conference schedule more to where you get rid of some of these cupcake games that nobody wants, and they don't do anything to help determine who should be in the playoff and who shouldn't be. Beating the snot out of some directional school and puffing up your record by a game, that doesn't do anything when it comes down to at-large playoff time and you're looking at a couple bubble teams and deciding who should be in and who should be out. If Indiana would have played Ole Miss last year, well, then I guess we would have got a little more clarity on who should have been in the playoff and who shouldn't have been. But so that's sort of my stance. If you want to stay at 8, stay at 8, but play 2 big boys in the non-conference schedule instead of just one Power 4 non-conference opponent, as many SEC teams do in the current construct.
I agree, Blake. When you look at it now, their teams are playing one Power 4 conference team in its non-conference schedule, but that leaves 3 games right now. And if you don't have an in-state rival, that pretty much means you're playing 3 games in which you know the outcome before the ball's kicked off. Not just at the beginning of the season, but right up there. I think this hurts the SEC when you have just a meaningless game in the stretch run. Better to have a showdown type game with a comparable opponent that could help your ratings with the selection committee and enhance your chances of strength of schedule. But they just play. I mean, it's almost hand-picked. The very worst opponent is usually right before you play a rivalry game there at the end of the year. I mean, it's just, come on. And here's the other thing. I think it's pretty obvious we're headed toward a 16-team playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, if you can't get enough teams from your conference in a 16-team playoff, come on.
Yeah, how good are you, really?
I mean, yeah, how good are they? It's going to get to the point, if you add many more teams to the playoff, it would be like bowl games. This is how many teams qualified for a bowl. It will lose all of its impact when you get beyond that. So, yeah, it's just I wish they would just go ahead and do something about this. But as you say, they keep kicking the can down the road. They will be soccer ready by the time they finally stop kicking.
Yeah, and so let's get into these playoff formats, John. I'm going to present to you the 2 leading models under consideration, and then I'm going to save for the end a wild card model that I'll reveal last. But we'll get into the 2 leading models first, and we're going to play a round of a game we like here on the podcast of love it, like it, okay with it, or hate it. So for these models, I'm asking for your ruling there on that scale. And so let's start with a model that I've taken to calling the rigged math equation model. So it tells you what I think about it. I hate it. The rigged math equation model is now stick with me here, the 4 plus 4 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 3AL format. And this is the format that is most favored by the Big Ten. And I'll unpack that for you before we get the ruling. So what this is 4 auto bids before the season even kicks off are assigned to the Big Ten, and 4 more are assigned to the SEC. So each of those 2 leagues know they're getting a minimum of 4 teams, even if their entire conference stinks that year. It's already predetermined. And then the Big 12 and the ACC each get 2 auto bids pre-assigned apiece. the next remaining conference champion, the best conference champion from whoever's left, so say that would have been Boise State this past year, but the next best available conference champion would get the next auto bid. And that leaves 3 at-large bids available in a 16-team model. So 13 of the 16 bids would be auto bid allocations, 3 at-large available. Of course, in many years, Notre Dame is probably taking one of those 3 at-large bids. Now, the Big Ten likes this model. This is the one favored in the Big Ten. The ACC and the Big 12, they don't like this model. And the SEC can't decide whether it likes this model or not. At the spring meetings, it seemed like the athletic directors in the SEC were pretty favorable to this model. And the coaches, though, on the contrary, they didn't seem to love this model. One thing this model allows for are the so-called play-in games. If you get, say, 4 auto bids in the Big Ten and the SEC, you could reserve 2 auto bids for your top 2 teams, and then to determine the other 2 auto bids, you could have 3 play number 6 in the conference standings and 4 play number 5 in the conference standings in play-in games to determine the auto bids. I'm not sure if you're confused yet, John, but I've almost confused myself. But that is the model as favored by the Big Ten and favored by some pencil pushers within the SEC. What say you? Love it, like it, sort of okay with it, or you hate it?
You lost me at play-in. When I heard play-in, it's like, yeah, you're sort of in the playoffs, but not quite. It just sounds like this caste system. Like, you can't quite get there to the upper class. You're upper middle class. Maybe if you buy another car and a boat, you can move in. You can move into the upper class, but I really hate that. One of the things when I first heard Big Ten, SEC getting automatic qualifiers, 4 teams, one of the things I liked about it was, well, then you shouldn't need to schedule all these patsy opponents.
Right.
Because you've assured a 4 bids. So you're going to get 4 teams in. I mean, maybe you're 8-4 with a rigorous schedule, but your top 4 teams get in. So I like that aspect. But the more I think about it, I realize they're not going to let go. They've got a death-like grip on those patsies. They just want to bring that team in and pound it and put up 60 plus on the scoreboard. Everybody goes home happy. You've asserted your might. So I want more good games. That's my goal. Mm-hmm. And I thought maybe this could help lead us down that path, but now I don't think so.
And the other thing I would raise, John, is just how relevant would those non-conference games be anyway if 13 of the 16 bids are determined by conference standings and conference play-in games? Like this year we have LSU opening the season at Clemson. That is a huge game in the playoff picture. We have Texas opening the season at Ohio State. Another huge game on down the line. I mean, we complain about all these cupcake games, but there are consequential non-conference games scattered in. That's one of the things I don't like about this model is, yes, it may decrease the incentive to play cupcake games, although, like you said, they still got a death grip on those cupcake games. Are they really going to let them loose? But in so much as maybe they would be willing to let them loose, just how important are the non-conference games anyway when 13 of the 16 bids are determined by the conference standings and play-in games? It's almost like those non-conference games become glorified exhibitions.
I know it. And what college football doesn't need are exhibition games.
Yeah.
See how that works in the NFL.
Yeah, I hear from fans all the time, and I know you do too, John, about their various complaints about college football. I've yet to receive my first feedback from a fan saying, you know what college football needs are more exhibition games and more play-in games. I've never once heard that from a fan. Of all the ideas I hear from fans, nobody's stumping for exhibition games or play-in games.
It's as I said, what what matters to me is on a football Saturday, watching games that matter.
Hmm.
Who wants to watch games that don't matter? It's whether it's if it doesn't count, who cares? If it's a guaranteed win, who cares? So I think there's a sense among these people that make the decisions, and it's a faulty premise, but a belief that college football will always be wildly popular, no matter what it does, that it will always be wildly popular. And there's some truth in that because we've seen all these changes and people hate the NIL, they hate transfer portal. At least that's what they say. But we're still filling up stadiums. They've still got good TV ratings. Yeah, I agree. It hasn't hurt the sport's popularity. Uh, However, if you start getting too many meaningless games,
Yes.
that's going to hurt your ratings. That's going to hurt the count in the stadium. It just is. There's no way to avoid it.
Yeah, and I mean, I've made myself clear. I hate this model. The final thing I hate about it is of the many things I hate. I've mentioned you're pre-assigning bids before the season even kicks off. I don't like that. I don't like that you're neutering non-conference games. The other thing I don't like is like you're training fans that really the only thing they need to watch is play-in Saturday plus the postseason. I mean that's what college basketball has become for
Yes.
98% of people who watch college basketball. Now, I'm not talking about the diehards, but for the vast majority of Americans, they tune into college basketball around the time of conference tournaments, which are basically the play-ins, see who's going to be in and who's out, particularly in the smaller conferences. So you watch the conference tournament, you watch March Madness, you do your brackets. It's awesome for a month, and that's it. That's what most people watch. And for college basketball, that might be fine. I don't think college football needs to become that. It has the greatest regular season in all of sports, but I think once you start moving to this play-in Saturday type of idea, I don't know. I think you're at risk of losing your fans a little bit on that mid-September game when they think, well, all we got to do is finish sixth in the conference standings, and then I'll just watch play-in Saturday. Why would I watch this non-conference game in mid-September when it all comes down to finishing in sixth place in the conference standings and winning a play-in game? I think they're changing the whole nature of the season with this whole rigged math equation model plus the play-in Saturday approach.
Well, see, I've already have lost interest in conference championship games. You go to a 16-team playoff, I would just as soon get rid of the conference championship games. One of the things I have a problem with is it didn't come to fruition last year, but it was a possibility. Georgia beat Texas twice, beat it in the regular season, beat it in the SEC championship game with its backup quarterback playing the majority of the game. It's possible that those teams could have ended up playing for the national title. Didn't work out that way. Ohio State got in the way, but they could have ended up playing. And Georgia could have beaten Texas 2 out of 3, and Texas won the national title by winning the championship game. So I that really to me detracts uh, from the regular season and the conference championship game, and it devalues what a team did. It devalues its accomplishments, and I don't like that. So that's just another. That's kind of a sidebar to all of this.
Yeah,
But
you're promoting the play-in games. To your point, you'd be elevating the play-in games and giving them more importance than your own conference championship game. I think, like you said, like conference championship games already mean a little bit less than they used to. But once you start putting play-in games on the same day that are determining playoff bids, and your conference champion, your conference runner-up are going to be in regardless. You're truly I mean, you're telling people to watch the 3 versus 6 game instead of the 1 versus 2 game, which is a little odd. So before we get to Model 2, John, your final verdict on this model: love it, like it, okay with it, hate it?
it's hate, thumbs down.
2 thumbs down. Got it.
Yeah.
I'm joining you. Hate it, 2 thumbs down. All right, model number 2. This one is being called the 5+11 format. Much more easy to understand. You get 5 auto bids to your top 5 conference champions, same way it is now. And then you have 11 at-large bids. So it's basically the playoff we have now with a 12-team playoff and just adding 4 more at-large bids, turning a 12-team playoff into a 16-team playoff by adding 4 extra at-large bids. This is the playoff that is favored by the Big 12 and the ACC. This is what they want. Now, what's interesting about this, John, and I kind of like it. The ACC and the Big 12 are a little bit putting themselves at risk by favoring this model. In the rigged math equation model, those conferences would be guaranteed 2 auto bids. In this model, they'd only be guaranteed 1 bid, and there might be some years in which they would only get 1 bid. But those conferences have taken the stance of, we're fine with that. Play the games, and we want the chance to pursue at-large bids just like everybody else. We don't want the situation where the Big Ten and the SEC are pre-assigned twice as many auto bids as they are, and so I kind of like that. They're taking a little bit of a risk there, but saying they're going to go. They want to go pursue the bids with the level playing field, just like everybody else can. The Big Ten, this is not their favored model. They like the rigged math equation model. The SEC, they can't decide whether they like this model or not. Again, the ADs seem to much more prefer the rigged math equation model. The coaches at the SEC spring meetings, they were trending more toward this 5+11 model with 5 auto bids, 1 for each of the top 5 conference champions, and then 11 at-large selections. So what say you about this playoff format, which, like I said, it's very similar to what we have now, other than you're adding 4 extra at-large bids?
Yeah, I'm okay with this. I'm not sure I love any of these plans, but I'm okay with this.
Okay, so this one just gets an okay verdict. You're fine with it.
Now, if I compare it to the previous plan that you brought up, yeah, I love it. I love it compared to when all this years ago, following college football, and a college national champion was determined by votes, and it evoked tremendous debate, frustration, agony, but a lot of publicity for college football because you didn't end up with the supposed best 2 teams playing each other. Teams are playing in different bowls, and then you just kind of judge them on the record and the eye test and significant wins. That it's almost like if you say that's one of the things why I'm so opposed to the 4 teams, just automatic, just you get in. I'm also, for this reason, I'm opposed to it. With this plan, you don't know when a super team might emerge from the ACC or the Big 12. And who's to say there might not be 3 really good teams in one of those leagues from year to year? So when you stipulate that this is how it's going to be forevermore, you're saying, well, that just can't happen. One year you might have a real scramble to see who's the best team in a conference. Nobody's really that good. But then another year you might have a huge separation where maybe 2 or 3 teams really distinguish themselves from the herd. Well, they have an opportunity to play for a championship. What I really don't want to see with any of these models is I'm watching a team play on Saturday and I'm thinking, that might be the best team in the country. And for that team not to be able to get into the playoff, that's what I don't want to see happen.
And Brandon Marcello of CBS Sports raised this point in a press conference with Greg Sankey last week at spring meetings, John, and I thought Sankey's head was going to explode. Just fuming mad. It really touched a nerve with Greg Sankey. And in Sankey's defense, the question was more of an editorialization rather than a question. But I thought the point was was well delivered. In the auto bid model, John, if you would have applied that to college basketball, I mean, basically the auto bid model assigns bids based on conference brand and prestige and reputation, and less on in-season meritocracy. And Brandon Marsala of CBS Sports raised the point to Sankey that if you would have done that this last college basketball season, the ACC and Big 12 would have been pre-assigned way more auto bids than the SEC, because historically those are better basketball conferences than the SEC. But the SEC, because March Madness leaves so many at-large bids open, the SEC could go out and get those bids through performance. So Brandon's point was, why should in football, these bids be pre-assigned in the preseason? And that doesn't really leave a conference that has like the type of year that the SEC had in basketball last year, the opportunity to gobble up bids. And Sankey said that sounds more like an editorialization than a question, and then proceeded to get angry and snippy for the next several minutes. But and in fairness, it was more of an editorialization than a question, but I thought the point was well delivered.
Yeah, I think the SEC doesn't want anyone to be able to insinuate that it's not the premier football conference. And I believe it is a premier football conference. However, it hasn't won the last two national championships. Big Ten teams won it. I don't regard the Big Ten and SEC on equal footing. I don't think the Big Ten has the depth of quality teams that the SEC does. But you can take 3 or 4 teams from the Big Ten, and they could certainly win against the top teams in the SEC.
And if I can interject, John, that's why, I mean, the Big Ten hasn't said this, but it's very obvious. That's why they like the rigged math equation playoff format, is they know their top 4 teams in a given year might be very comparable to the SEC's top 4 teams, and they're not so much worried about their 5 through 8 teams, because that's not what the Big Ten's about. The Big Ten's about their top 4 teams, and that's that. So they're guaranteeing bids for, in a given year, say Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and Oregon, and to heck with everybody else. You got those 4 guaranteed in a given year.
There's no passionate quest for Wisconsin and Iowa from the Big Ten to make the college football playoff.
Not from the conference office, apparently.
No,
anyway.
The Big Ten does not care. Their fans might like it, but no, they don't. And then surely Iowa would go into the playoffs and not score, and that an image would be cemented. But see that you could have the Big 12 is not as good as the SEC. Maybe it's not as good as the Big 10. That doesn't mean its best teams, maybe its top 2 teams even in a given year, possibly could beat those teams, could be the best of the best. We don't know that. That's why I don't want to try and make it sound like every year is going to be the same. It's that intractable. Every year you have the same number. No, you don't need that. You need to have a plan, to me, where the best teams can make the playoff.
And I think one of the lingering concerns about the SEC going to this 5+11 model is there are some within the SEC that don't think strength of schedule is rewarded enough by the selection committee. Now, I'm not sure that I entirely agree with that. I think that generally over the years, the selection committee has honored the SEC's strength of schedule. Now, we can debate whether SMU or Indiana should have got in last season over a 9-3 SEC team. I think that's a fair debate. I've said that I wouldn't have had SMU in. I would have had another SEC team instead. On the other hand, each of those SEC teams had some flaws in their resume. I didn't think it was a great travesty. I did think the committee made a mistake by putting SMU in, and some thought the same about Indiana. But the point I would raise is, like, everything's open to reworking right now before 2026. Like, there is no format for 2026 and beyond, and the SEC wields the biggest club. And so if you don't think the selection committee puts enough prominence on strength of schedule, well, write that more clearly into the selection process rules, that, strength of schedule is the most heavily weighted factor. Right now, like, there's a few nebulous rules that the selection committee is supposed to consider, but by and large, it's pretty freewheeling. they can do what they want. Whereas much more, the March Madness format, yeah, that's freewheeling too, but I do feel like it's a little more understood when it comes to March Madness. They're looking for those quad 1, quad 2 victories. They're looking at the net rankings. And you may not like the last teams in and the last teams left out, but usually you can understand the rationale based on the criteria that's outlaid before the season. So that would be my point to the SEC is like, if you don't like the way the selection committee does it, well, you have the power right now to kind of influence the way the rules are going to be set up in the future. And you could have strength of schedule maybe be written into the rules as a little bit more heavily weighted.
Blake, I think one of the things that's really paramount to me in strength of schedule, it's not just a within conference competition.
Yes.
Your victories outside your conference become magnified. That's why I think it is a good idea for the SEC teams to match up with Big Ten teams.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Prove
those,
yourself. Yeah,
those outcomes mean something. We go back to last year. I thought it really hurt the SEC that Texas A&M on its home field lost to Notre Dame, lost decisively, played poorly. Notre Dame won a big road game. It was such a big win for Notre Dame that it catapulted it past that Northern Illinois debacle. That upset loss was kind of thrown out, and Notre Dame made the playoff and did okay. So that game was very meaningful. If Texas A&M had won that game, it really helped not just the Aggies, but the entire SEC. And it really hurt your competition for those at-large bids. Same thing with Southern Cal and LSU. LSU ended up with 4 losses, so it wasn't even right on the brink of the playoffs. But it lost to Southern Cal, which proved to be a so-so team. Nothing special, 7-6, something like that. But that loss was had huge ramifications, I thought, for the SEC because LSU was a good team from the conference, but it couldn't beat a mediocre Big Ten team. And so there are games like that that are really magnified. So that's a way to really enhance your schedule and prove yourself. But I'm not sure everybody wants to take that risk. They talk about
to that point, John, and I want to get to the final wild card model here in a minute, but to that point, it was so interesting at the spring meetings on Wednesday. The coaches broke session, and some coaches, were talking to the media on Wednesday. Some decided that they weren't. But Brian Kelly of LSU held court, and Brian Kelly said, "I speak for the room, the coaches' room, when I say that we want to play a Big Ten challenge game every year. So make one of the regular season non-conference games, match them all up, an SEC versus a Big Ten team." He said, "I speak for the room on that." Interesting. Then I went over, spoke with Sam Pittman, me and a few other reporters. Said, "Sam, Brian Kelly says he speaks for the room when you all want to play a Big Ten team in the non-conference schedule." Pittman says, "No, I'd kind of prefer the status quo of 8 SEC games and kind of do what we want in the non-conference schedule." Now, Pittman did go on to say that if his 2 choices were either a 9th conference game or 8 SEC games and a Big Ten challenge game, that he would prefer that instead of the 9th conference game. But if just given his druthers, no, he'd prefer just the status quo. So that was a very interesting moment when Brian Kelly said, "I speak for the room when saying we all want one of these Big Ten games." It's like, nah, I don't think you do. There are some folks out there that just want to be able to schedule some patsy in the non-conference and move on with life.
There would be a great potential for embarrassment. You mentioned Sam Pittman. The first thing that comes to mind is Arkansas being matched against Illinois in a Big Ten challenge with former Razorback coach Brett Bielema. I think that would hurt the Hog faithful very much if Bielema brought an Illinois team back to Fayetteville and won decisively.
Agreed. Okay, so we're going to get to the final wild card format here, John. But before we move on, your final verdict on this 5+11 format. I heard you're most kind of okay with this.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah, you're okay with it. All right. All right, here is the wild card format, John. And I'm going to call this, because this is what it is, the Lane Kiffin model. When I spoke with Kiffin earlier this spring, Kiffin floated this idea past me for a 16-team playoff, all at-large bids. No auto bids, no buys, 16 teams, all at-large. How do you select them? I asked Lane. He said, need a human element, but have some analytics in there, some sort of metric that the humans look at. Ultimately, humans are making the decision with the help of metrics. But 16 teams, all at large. Lane then at spring meetings, he kind of workshopped this in our conversation in the spring, and he brought this idea up to the larger group at spring meetings during his press conference last week. So this is the Lane Kiffin model, a 16-team bracket, all at-large bids. Some years that might mean only 4 conferences are represented. Some years maybe only 3 conferences are represented. Some years 6 conferences could be represented in a long shot year. But what do you think of this model? No auto bids, 4 rounds, 16 teams, and that's that.
I don't like it as well as the second one, and I like it better than the first one of my choices. I almost could give it an okay. I would give it an okay if it was the only alternative was option 2, where the SEC and Big Ten get 4 automatic bids.
Yeah, option 1.
The problem I would have with it, Blake, is that, and maybe this is just being at this as long as I have and growing up in the Southeast and being just really Southern down to my core, that winning the SEC always meant a lot. Now we're losing some of that, and maybe it's already gone. So maybe this ship has sailed, and winning a conference championship doesn't matter. I don't think people think much about it in basketball, who won a conference championship. You think what you do in the NCAA tournament. I think it takes away from the regular season. I thought last year's Georgia beating Texas in the SEC championship game was quite a win for Georgia, because Georgia was not the most talented team on the field, and it was playing with its backup quarterback. But it just meant so much to me to Georgia to win. And it was the old guard versus the new guard when you look at Texas coming into the league in expansion. So I just thought that meant a lot. And maybe I'm clinging to the past a little too much here. Maybe
I think you're clinging to the SEC championship a little bit, John, just because I think in any 16-team model, the SEC champion and the runner-up are going to get in regardless.
Yes.
But where I do think you make a fair point is like in some of these other conferences, like the Big 12 or the ACC, knowing that an auto bid is on the line, that might still be a little bit of a carrot for those games, where if it's just you could win your conference championship in those leagues and still not get in the Lane Kiffin model. It's all at-large bids. I mean, theoretically, you could win the ACC and not get in the playoff, or you could win the Big 12 and not get in the playoff. I think, to your point, maybe there is still some value in having 5 auto bids for the best conference champions, and you could eliminate a little bit of controversy there and say winning a conference still means something. And I think that's your larger point. In that 5+11 model, you're signifying that winning your conference means something. There's no drama as to whether you're getting in or out. It's not left to the committee. You're one of the 5 best conference champions. That means something. You're in without any drama. Whereas in the Lane Kiffin model, there could still be drama if you're a conference champion. Probably not in the SEC, but maybe one of these other conferences we're talking about.
I think part of that is our rivalries. Every team, regardless of its conference, has a number 1 rival. Some have more than one rival. Those are really important games. They matter so much to fans. So most SEC games, in a way, are rivalry games. But I think back to last year when the Ohio State fan base became absolutely unhinged because it lost to Michigan. Buckeyes fans, many of them wanted to fire Ryan Day. That's how much that one game mattered to fans. I I'm not so sure some of them wouldn't have rather beaten Michigan than won a national title.
Yeah, I think more than some. I think there were plenty of them that would probably have
I mean,
traded that.
it's so irrational. However, it does speak to the significance of games involving teams that play on a regular basis. There's a history there, a tradition, and I guess I'd like to see that matter some, but I pride myself in being able to move away from my football roots and go with the change, go with the flow, and it's changed. So maybe, as I say, that's a bit of melancholy where I'm longing for the good old days of rivalries. And oh, they just crowned the SEC championship. Now send them to the Sugar Bowl. So this is a brave new world, and you're right. It probably shouldn't matter. That's not a valid reason to oppose this.
Yeah. So okay. So in summary, you're largely okay. Maybe not the greatest thing in the world, but you're largely okay with
Yeah, I'm
either the
okay. Yeah.
yeah with either the 5+11 model or the Lane Kiffin model of all at large, and you hate the rigged math equation model. Before we go, John, just quickly, I'm going to run down some of the matchups. Now, these would have been the matchups using the top 16 teams in the final CFP rankings last year, John, because I think it's helpful to see what matchups could look like, because some people say, like, well, do we really need 16 teams in a playoff? And I don't know that we need 16 teams in a playoff, but I have accepted probably the likelihood that that's where it's headed. And I was a little encouraged once you started looking at the matchups that, like, oh, hey, I'm actually pretty excited by some of these matchups. And I don't think it would be such a joke that we have 16 teams in it, because the game has changed. I think the playing field has leveled just enough. I mean, we saw Ole Miss stomp Georgia last year, right? Ole Miss didn't make the playoff. Georgia did. We saw South Carolina get hot at the end of the season. We saw Clemson get hot at the end of the season. Point being, I think in theory, sometimes a 16-team playoff seems too big and too unwieldy, and you're watering it down too much. But then when you look at the matchups, it's like, oh, yeah, I could go for some of these matchups. So let me just run it down, John. Here's what the first-round matchups would have been in a 16-team model last year with no buys, a no-buy model, 16 teams using the final CFP rankings. So I'm going to run them down and just get your overall verdict of what you think of these. So first round matchups would have been number 16 Clemson at number 1 Oregon. Clemson, of course, got into the 12-team playoff because they won the ACC championship, but they were ranked number 16 in the CFP rankings. So if you're just going by the rankings, that would have been a first-round game. ACC champion against Big Ten champion, Dabo versus Dan Lanning, Clemson at Oregon. Another first-round matchup, number 15 South Carolina at number 2 Georgia. South Carolina, Georgia used to be kind of a rivalry game. They didn't play in the regular season last year because the SEC's gotten so huge, but they would have met in a first-round playoff game if you're taking 16 teams based off the rankings. Another first-round playoff game, number 14 Ole Miss at number 3 Texas. Another SEC versus SEC, but because the conference is so huge, these teams didn't play in the regular season. We would have got to see whether Jekyll or Hyde showed up for Ole Miss and whether they could have taken down Texas. Another first-round game, number 13 Miami at number 4 Penn State. Classic offense versus defense in this one. Would have been Cam Ward against Penn State's defense. Number 12 Arizona State at number 5 Notre Dame. Arizona State running back Cam Scatabo against the teeth of Notre Dame's defense. How about this one for a brand matchup, John? It would have been number 11 Alabama at number 6 Ohio State. Ohio State probably would have pasted them, but in terms of hype and billing, that would have been a huge one. Number 10 SMU would have been at number 7 Tennessee. Tennessee had to go on the road in that 12-team playoff model, but if we're just going 16 teams based off the rankings, they would have hosted SMU at Neyland Stadium. And then the 8-9 matchup, I think this one actually would have been really, really interesting. Number 9 Boise State at number 8, Indiana. I think there's some upset potential there. I think Ashton Genty and Boise State could have upset Indiana. So looking at, not just the idea of a 16-team playoff, but there's what it could have looked like in reality last season. I don't know. That actually sounds pretty good to me, John. I look at several of those matchups and think I'm pretty interested by that.
I'm really interested in those matchups. I think that would be so much better than what we had. Honestly, we'd waited for this expanded playoff and anticipation of how good it could be. In effect, the first round games were a bust, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
But even you look at number 1 seed Oregon against 16 Clemson, I think that would have been a close game.
It would have been an interesting game. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Oregon would have blown out Clemson. Golly, I'd love South Carolina and Georgia, 2 old SEC rivals. They used to play all the time in the SEC East, so that would be intriguing. Ole Miss sometimes I thought Ole Miss had pretty close to as much talent as Texas. I thought it was one of the most talented teams in the country. Just couldn't make the playoff, but that would have been interesting. All of these games, I think we would have had in Alabama and Ohio State, whereas Ohio State, to me, should have been a solid favorite. Those are right at the top when you look long term and look at in terms of just history and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, Tennessee certainly would have preferred playing SMU to Ohio State. Boy, that could have been a 40-point swing. And Boise and Indiana, I agree. We're kind of unsure about both of those teams. Like, well, I don't know. Is Indiana for real? I mean, and Boise State, because it's an outlier and not one of the big 4 conferences. So, yeah, I really like that. I'm ready for this right now.
Yeah, I did too. Like, if you would have just asked me in a vacuum, like, do you think college football needs a 16-team playoff? I say no. College football doesn't need a 16-team playoff. Might water down the regular season a little bit more. Not that I thought the regular season was watered down last year. I thought it was a great regular season in determining the 12-team playoff. So many games mattered, like Alabama losing to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, like Ole Miss losing to Kentucky and Florida. Those games really mattered to the final playoff picture. I didn't think the season was watered down, but in a vacuum, I would have said 16 teams aren't needed, 12's enough. But then seeing the matchups, I kind of like it. The only thing I don't like, John, is the rigged math equation, 4 + 4 + I'm not going to go through everything. But 16 teams, as long as it's not predetermined before the season kicks off, which conferences get the bids, and we actually get to watch the games and see who earns the bids. I think I'm starting to become more and more on board with this idea of a 16-team playoff.
Blake, I wonder when you go to 16 teams, though, we used to think is making a bowl game, that was a goal of somewhat. The best programs had to do more than that, obviously, but making the bowl game was sort of signified success for the most part. Not making them was more significant than making them, and teams that didn't make them. But now we go to a 16-team playoff. We think, okay, you made the playoff. It's a good year. With 16 teams, I don't know. Everybody's not going to think that. Every fan base is not going to think, oh, we made the playoff. We're one of the top 16 teams in the country. No, we're supposed to be one of the top 5 teams, or at least the top 10. So I don't know if it would carry as much weight now making the playoffs as it would have in the past.
Maybe not. I to your point, like if you're Alabama or Ohio State and you lose a first round playoff game, I don't think that's going down as a successful season. On the other hand, a 16-team playoff would have ushered South Carolina and Ole Miss, among others, into the playoff last year. I think that would have been something celebrated at South Carolina and Ole Miss. So I think it kind of depends who you are. And sort of that happens in college basketball, right? There are some teams that if you lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament, or if you lose in a play-in game in the NCAA tournament, well, your coach could get fired depending on what school you're at, right? Like, I mean, losing a play-in game in Dayton does not go down as a success for many, many basketball schools. For others, making the big dance, and come what may, that's a successful season. So yeah, I think that's fair. But yeah, overall, starting to warm to this 16 team idea. John, we are in the prediction business at times, and so let's just do it on the way out the door. Final prediction here as it stands in early. We're recording this near the end of May. You're probably listening to this as it's rolled to June. Your prediction for 2026: A, will the SEC play 8 conference games still, or will it go to 9? Which do you predict? And also, which of these 2 leading playoff formats do you think, assuming it is one of these 2, maybe that's a dangerous assumption, but assuming it's either the math equation model with the we'll call it the auto bid model, or the 5+11, 5 auto, 11 at large. What's your prediction for each? Does the SEC go to 9 conference games or stay at 8? And which of these playoff models, the 2 leading contenders, wins out?
I think it will go to 9 games.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the plan 2, the 5-11 model, 5 champions and 11 at-large bids, that makes the most sense. I don't always count on administrators making the most sense, but I think those are the best. I think the SEC is going to start catching too much flack for not playing a 9th game. I do.
Yeah, and the other reason I'm starting to wonder if that 5+11 model might win out, John, is I think when the SEC coaches realized, hey, in the auto bid system, the SEC is capped at a maximum of 7 bids. 9 of the 16 bids they're ineligible for because they're already pre-divvied up to other conferences. In the 5+11 model, the SEC is eligible for up to 12 bids. Now, they're not going to get 12 bids in most years, but could they get 7? Could they get 8? Could they get 9? Yeah, I think that's possible. And I think once the coaches kind of stepped back and looked at that, like, hey, why would we make ourselves ineligible from 9 of the 16 bids just to make the Big Ten happy when we could go chase 12 out of the 16 bids in the other model? I think it makes sense why the SEC coaches might prefer that 5+11.
What do you think on the 9-game schedule? Do you think it goes to the 9 game?
Oh, that's tough. Boy, these are 2 tough ones. I pose the question. I better answer it. I think they stay at 8, John, but I think they'll go to the 5+11 model. So we'll split the vote on the 8-9. We're in unison on the. I think the 5+11's going to win out, and the Big Ten's going to be the loser in this deal. They're not going to get what they want. 8 versus 9. It may go to 9. It may go to 9. That feels like a coin flip to me. I think it could go to 9 if you're able to write into the playoff rules that strength of schedule is the most important factor, or that it's heavily weighted, because then you're kind of minimizing the risk of adding that 9th conference game of, well, we've got it written into the playoff rules. Strength of schedule will be the number 1 metric considered, or a weighted metric considered.
Do you think if it goes to a 9-game model, it will have a Big Ten challenge?
No, I think this Big Ten challenge is something fun for us to discuss. Is something for Brian Kelly to say he speaks for the room. I don't think the commissioners are going to get involved in non-conference scheduling, as powerful as these commissioners like to be. And I don't think the schools are going to surrender their autonomy of non-conference scheduling. So I think certain SEC and Big Ten schools will be able to independently cook up some agreements, but to have a 16-game SEC Big Ten challenge that is an edict that this is what is going to happen across conferences, nah, I don't see collectively the schools giving up their autonomy over their non-conference scheduling to decide who they want to play and who they don't. I don't see them surrendering that autonomy. I think it's great to talk about, and I'd love to see it. And maybe if strength of schedule was a weighted factor, you could just nudge schools in that direction. But as far as an edict of every SEC team must play a Big Ten team, I think we're still a long, long ways away from that. I hope I'm wrong, but I think schools will retain their non-conference scheduling autonomy. We'll leave it there, see where this playoff conversation goes. It could drag on. quite frankly, for several more months. The deadline for this is not till December 1st. So buckle up, see if any more models emerge. But right now, 16 teams seems like the number. The bigger question is which model is going to win out. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.